Welcome to those of you who are joining us live, and hello to those of you watching on the recording. This is our first webinar of 2023, and we're tackling the topic of optimizing your marketing spend. So in the backdrop of a joyous inbound recession, optimizing your marketing spend is going to be as important as ever. And we're very fortunate today to have an incredibly talented and experienced panel in Tim and Rob. Tim, obviously founder at Mightybytes, the US-based B Corp, supporting sustainable brands, NGOs and non-profits on digital marketing. So thanks for joining us today, Tim.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic, thank you. And of course, Rob Vos, you may have heard him talking about how everybody hates your brand on his podcast, or worked with him throughout his 20 plus years in the world of marketing now, both brand and agency side with some big names like Vodafone, Game, Pets at Home, Disney, and obviously agency side. So thanks for joining us today, Rob, as well.
No problem, happy to be here.
Fantastic. So, and I, for those of you who don't know, I'm Tom, the sales and marketing director here at Webmart, the sustainable marketing agency. So thank you all for joining. I want to dive straight into this one because we've got an hour and we've got 40 plus years of experience to eke out of the pair of you. So as I mentioned at the start, we have got a challenging macroeconomic environment at the moment as we head into a recession. And as we've experienced in our careers and over the previous decades, as soon as recessions hit, marketeers tend to worry. Marketing's often budgets that get cut, and ensuring we have an optimized marketing spend is obviously vital in this period. But maybe if we start off with you, Rob, as we enter a recession, what do you typically see that happens in the world of marketing, and what should marketers be aware of?
Well, I would say what usually happens and what should happen aren't necessarily the same thing. So what happens a lot is that CFOs, I won't say panic, but they start to get a bit worried about margin and revenue and all those kind of good things. And in my experience, some CFOs see marketing as a cost center rather than something that invests and creates growth. And as a result, they start to peel back some of the marketing activity that happens. They'll peel back, usually start with what Les Binet and Peter Field, who wrote The Long and Short of It, which if you haven't read, it's fantastic, would describe as brand building work, the longer term brand building activity that is the kind of foundation of long-term growth. And they'll start to strip that out because it doesn't have as an immediate ROI as something like what short-term sales activation work, like maybe that's digital advertising or search or whatever those kind of things are. And they start to pull back on that, and they start to pull back maybe even across marketing as a whole. But history shows us, and there are many case studies of this in the many recessions that I think probably 2 or 3 recessions I've been through in my life, that they're actually maintaining your spend in marketing, if possible, especially on brand building activity, is what sets you up for growth when the recession inevitably, he says, crossed, fingers crossed, anyway, inevitably recedes, that people cut too deep too fast. And there is a real benefit of not going dark, not switching off your marketing in the crisis, and then try and relight the fires again when recovery comes, because by then the people who haven't turned off their marketing spend are already ahead of you. It's a hard thing to have a conversation with a CFO that says we really should at least try and maintain what we're doing. But that's the biggest mistake, or the biggest thing I think people see, is they kind of panic and clam up, which actually is not history tells us is not the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, Tim, in the digital world of marketing, where things can be changed very, very quickly, I would imagine that's something you experience with your customers at times like this. Even if it's not a macroeconomic shock, I'm thinking back to like in Europe we had GDPR. And the joys of that, where as soon as it came out, everybody just stopped everything because they were terrified. And the ones that kind of rode the wave and planned things out and did things properly came out a lot better. Is this something that you have experienced on your end?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably, I should put a little context in here. As you noted at the beginning, we work mostly with social enterprises, nonprofits, charities, other B Corps. Some of our clients are good size and big companies, but many of them, their marketing departments are often constrained from the get-go, like, at the baseline. And so, or they don't have digital expertise, which is why they turn to an agency like ours. But what we've seen in the past, in 2008 and with COVID and a number of different times. I mean, we've been around for 25 years. So even the, .com bubble 1.0 in 2000, we've seen, marketing departments slash their teams and, get rid of whatever they feel like they don't need, and then outsource that stuff to agencies like ours, which is great for an agency like ours, but it's not great for the client overall and the company overall, because what often happens is once things start getting going back again, they want to build their team back up again. And all of that institutional knowledge that was there is gone. And they've now outsourced all of that to a third party that maybe doesn't have the information and knowledge that they necessarily need. Now, it's a great opportunity for the agency to build a long-term, more sustainable relationship with that client. But generally, what we found is even when the new team comes on, once the recession kind of levels out and things get back to normal, is that it takes years to get back to where they were, because they have to, the new team has to pick all of that stuff up. They might come in with different knowledge and experience, and so they're going to want to do things differently. We've worked with some clients who've still are catching up in 2023 for decisions that they made in 2020 on their marketing side and stuff. And a lot of times as their agency will ask them, well, what about this and what about that? And they just don't know. They just don't have, they're like, well, that was the previous team and they did this way. And so, when it comes to things like using and managing your content management system, if that's a technology thing and they don't know, then they're really at a disadvantage, because they have, kind of reduced tech stack and reduced marketing platforms. And, they're really challenged by that. And so we're always trying to help our clients, do more with less, be as resource efficient as possible, and to build long-term capacity, slowly in ways that make holistic sense. And that way, when something like a recession comes along, it's not a hair on fire moment. It's just like, okay, yeah, we know how to deal with this. This is how we're gonna approach it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because the points you both raised there are kind of sort of explain the effect that we see with companies who maintain spending throughout a recession, coming out of it on the other end better. You've got the point that Rob made about cutting the brand building activity too soon and too quickly and too deeply, which means when you're coming out of the end, you don't necessarily have the awareness or the legitimacy and the trust there for when you turn the marketing pipe back on to see those conversions. And Tim's point there that we experience as well is the fluctuation between insourcing and outsourcing of marketing activity, and losing that knowledge that you have internally means that when you are ready to turn back on and start insourcing again, you're almost building from scratch almost. And so if those are a couple of the problems that the kind of common problems that businesses, or common mistakes that businesses make, what can business owners, directors, marketeers do about that now? What can we say to the CFO to help maintain budgets? How can we avoid those pitfalls that have been made in the past?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people end up getting a bit internal, and there are lots of evidence, empirical evidence and case studies about the impact of turning off, let's say, marketing completely in a recession, or rapidly reducing it. There's a concept defined as extra or excess share of voice. So share of voice is just how much money you spend relative to the size of your market share. And there's some empirical evidence that shows if you increase your share of voice above that of your market share, you're likely as a brand to grow. Now, in a recession, essentially what that means is most brands will be cutting spend, as we talked about. So if you can maintain yours, all of a sudden you're generating excess share of voice anyway. Your share of voice is going up. So there is lots of evidence out there and lots of great articles and studies about excess share of voice and how that can drive. You just Google recession in marketing marketing in recession, Mark Ritson, you'll find some amazing information about that kind of stuff. And if that doesn't work, there's a bunch of other things. If there were Formula One fans, a great quote I've just found from Ayrton Senna, which I think really encapsulates kind of the situation here, which is, I'm just going to read off my other screen, so forgive me for not looking directly at the camera here, but you cannot overtake 15 cars in sunny weather, but you can when it's raining, which I think is a really interesting and prescient context for that. I think it's really important. I also think as marketing education increases and more people understand the principles of the long and short of it, and Byron Sharp and how brands grow and all that kind of good stuff, more and more people are becoming turned on to the idea that actually maintaining spend in a recession is important. So if you don't do it, you're almost like a double whammy, in the sense that less people will reduce spend this recession because more people are educated into the fact that actually we've been through a couple of these now, and we kind of know, we have a playbook or sort of evidence out there that tells us what to do, which I think is an interesting angle. CFOs respond to that kind of external empirical evidence, I find, at least in my experience anyway. So
it's almost a shift from what might have been in the past, which is we're cutting costs, marketing is going to be a part of that, to now you have to have a real good justification for cutting marketing spend during a recession because we've got that much evidence that in the long term we're going to be better off.
I think so, and you've got to be pragmatic about it. It might be that for the company to survive. So there's no point in being a diva if your company is really, really on the precipice. But there is a whole bunch of insight around that and around. I think the other thing about it is that marketing should also be the voice of the customer during a recession as well. You're the customer representative in reality as well, and I think that's how they're feeling, how they're doing and what have you. But yeah, I think that empirical evidence is definitely crucial to the conversation. And yeah, I would hope that your CFO would understand that.
And the point you make there about being the voice of the customer, and I guess, Tim, I'll come to you on this one, is during a recession or any kind of macroeconomic shock like with COVID, customer requirements, customer needs, customer wants change. So if we're saying that we need to be maintaining spend to increase our share of voice so we can come out better the other side, what things should marketeers be looking to change in their approach and their messaging in difficult economic times?
I think like traditional marketers will look at funnels and competitors, and they'll use terms like that. Impact focused marketers that are really grounded by purpose and a strong sense of purpose will think more in terms of ecosystems and communities and that kind of thing, and their brand is going to be a core part of that community, but maybe not the leader of that community. And so understanding these communities based on shared values is going to ultimately, especially during economic downtimes, people are going to rely on each other in times of need, and knowledge sharing, and this idea of shared learning. People are constantly going to be looking for ways to solve their problems, and so these kind of customer communities that have popped up all over are really great opportunities to help the organizations you're trying to serve, the communities that you're trying to serve, the customers you're trying to serve, and it doesn't necessarily put that. It's not it's not a bullhorn. It's really a conversation, and making sure that you're part of it, but you're not necessarily just spraying a fire hose of messaging out there. That you're really actively listening and trying to be a collective part of the solution and create positive impact. I think, one of the best examples I've seen of that is that B Lab, the nonprofit that's certified B Corp. So B Corps are, for anybody who doesn't know, is they're driven by an assessment that they certify every 3 years, and it kind of helps them adhere to the highest verified standards of transparency, accountability, sustainability, et cetera. And so, when COVID-19 hit in 2020, B Lab, the organization that certifies B Corps, decided to stop all their certifications and solely focus on helping the community of B Corps to make sure that they had what they need. And they basically served as this kind of go-between, so they could help one organization that needed resources with one organization that had resources. And they spent 9 months of 2020 just serving that purpose, just filling that need and making sure that the community was thriving. As such, B Corps generally as a community did better than more traditional businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic. And people took notice, and the B Corp community exploded when COVID hit, because they saw that this was happening, and they saw that this community is, coming together to help its own, and during trying times, and people were inspired by that, and so hence the B Corp community has been growing globally at a very, very rapid rate since 2020.
I think that's sorry, I think it's an interesting point there about helpfulness during a recession. You were talking about customers and how they're feeling. A lot of customers probably feeling pretty scared, especially from a sort of B2C perspective. They're pretty nervous about what's happening. We've got the unusual situation of a recession allied with inflation. He says, to depress everybody on the call. And I think that's a really interesting angle around helpfulness, and how brands can help people during that process. I also think there's going to be an interesting question around, we've talked in the marketing world about purpose for years, and the agency I work for, Iris Worldwide, talks about it a lot, and talks about something called active participation, which is, I think, what you were talking a little bit about there, Tim, in terms of people engaging in brands at a deeper level than just pulling it off the shelf. They want to be involved, or certainly a chunk of them want to be involved. What I think it's going to be interesting, I think there's going to be some interesting opportunities, is things like making choices based on sustainability. Does that change as people have less money in their pockets? There is an argument that says sustainability is the pursuit of those with money to a degree, and does that change? And will you start to see things like people switching to own brand products? That's a usual regular thing. Like if you're an FMCG brand, do you slide down the value chain from Waitrose to Sainsbury's to Aldi, whatever that chain might be? I think there's going to be some, as in any recession, there'll be some winners who come out the bottom of this, because I think A, they recognise those changes and they're able to spin their model around, and B, their purpose is so baked into what they do that they use that as their kind of life jackets. I think I think we'll see a lot of people jettison, potentially badly, potentially jettison purpose, because it's not core to their, not really core. It was like a marketing thing they thought they'd.
Right, it's a layer that they just kind of put a frosting on the top.
Yeah. Rather, the classic example everyone talks about is Patagonia, right? There's that great phrase from Bill Bernbach, and as an ex-DDB alumni, his quotes are burned into your brain. But one of them, and the one of the most profound, is a principle isn't a principle until it costs you money. And I changed that to be a principle isn't a principle that costs you something, because it might be time, it might be friends, who knows what that might be. And I think a true purpose-led company sacrifices short-term gain for what they believe. And I think for a lot of those brands that stay true to that, they can kind of write that purpose out during the recession. I think you'll see a lot of people jettison it, because, as you said, Tim, it's a candy-coated layer on top of what they're actually doing.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good kind of note of warning, I guess, that while purpose and impact can be really great drivers during a recession, if you don't already have the foundations in place, you might run risk of being called out for the frosting, being called out for not being authentic in all of this. So it could be a good time to get those foundations in place, but really, don't run out and try to do sustainability marketing and sending messages out there if you're not actually living the story.
Yeah. And I think from a consumer perspective that they're getting wise to it. I think you see a lot of what's been going on with the Qatar World Cup, and it's very easy to put up a Pride logo on your Twitter profile. Like Rob says, that doesn't cost anything, but pulling a sponsorship deal that you have with Qatar World Cup does.
Yes.
And so
you just have to look at the sort of pushback to what the lovely people at Brewdog have been, did, and some of those things to see
Well,
the how it can.
They
how it
lost
can
their
go wrong.
B Corp certification, I believe, right? Didn't they lose it? Like they actually
believe
lost
they
their B
did.
Corp
Yeah.
certification. Yeah.
I
Which
believe they did.
that doesn't happen often. You got to be kind of bad when to get that to happen.
Yeah, that's a certain red flag, isn't it? So,
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I think as consumers become wise to it, and maybe a few years ago you could get away with a bit of greenwashing or a bit of, oh yeah, we have this great purpose, which is to support our local communities and blah blah blah. I think people are wise to it now, and as soon as you start doing that, it's going to have a much bigger negative impact than the small positive one that it might have had if you've got away with it. So, and yeah, I totally agree. I think as soon as recession hits and finances become tight, people get worried. If it's costing you something to have that particular purpose, that's going to quickly go out the window. I mean, we've already seen it. We have creating sustainability offerings that don't cost anymore because we know some brands won't be able or willing to pay more despite saying how sustainable they are. So that's going to be an interesting trend to keep an eye on in 2023, I think.
We're going off on a tangent here, but I think affordable sustainability is the next kind of thing. Like how can you truly be sustainable, whether that's at an employee level, an environmental level, whatever it might, an ethical level overall, and do it in a way in which it doesn't cost people a load of money, because people are having to make very difficult decisions between heating and eating and those kind of things. How do you make it so that you can make the right choice but at a cost that isn't too expensive? But that's probably a whole different webinar.
Yeah, I think between the three of us we could cover the rest of the day talking on sustainability stuff. So just to bring it back to optimizing marketing, we kind of had a chat off camera beforehand, and we talked about how an excellent way of ensuring that you've optimized your marketing spend is looking a little bit more holistically at marketing, looking a little bit deeper at your KPIs. And I think, Rob, at the time you had a few interesting examples of where sometimes KPIs for marketers might not necessarily be aligned with the best interests of the business.
Well, I think there's a few elements in relation to kind of KPIs, because I always have this phrase that KPIs corrupt behavior, and sometimes in a good way. And corrupt always sounds negative, obviously, but how you set up KPIs, especially within your marketing team, I think becomes really, really important. I think one of the things that stands out, especially in a recession, is that people focus quite a lot on revenue and sales and the top line number, rather than say profit, for example. People think, oh God, revenue's down, sales are down, those kind of things. And I think they start to lean towards things like sales promotions, which are a nice, sugar rush. You get a short-term boost in revenue, not so much maybe in profit. And actually it's been proven that sales promotions can be a little bit dangerous, not only from the long-term brand perspective, but also from the perspective of actually you're not generating that many incremental sales. You're either pulling forward sales from time, you're giving discounts to people who are already going to buy from you anyway, or if you're like an FMCG brand, you're doing a promo in Sainsbury's, you're just taking sales from Tesco to Sainsbury's. So I think there's some interesting things around setting KPIs within a recessionary environment that focus on the right thing, rather than things that can create things like sales promotions and what have you. And incidentally, at Iris, we're working with a couple of brands who have gone the other way, who have put their prices up and sort of sworn off price discounts. So Nielsen Active Holidays, if anybody knows them, they do kind of mid to higher tier active holidays. So if you want to go windsurfing and God knows what else, they've got a lot of beach clubs and they have a lot of ski brands, but they've decided to stop discounting as much, and they're going to try and going a profit route. And Hotel Choco are kind of going that same way as well. So I think there's an element of, in a recession, are you focusing on the right metrics as a brand, and making sure that we talked about this earlier, about everyone's pointing in the right direction and making the same decisions based on the same KPIs, rather than we've all got different targets to achieve. And I think
Right.
that's where it can start to get a bit fractured.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more in that generally a recession is a great opportunity for an organization to create a better relationship with its data. You know, and we're, as a digital agency, you know, you can pretty much measure anything in digital, and many people want to. And just because you can measure something doesn't necessarily mean you should. And so a lot of times we're encouraging our clients to you know, as Rob said, think about the right metrics. And figure out what that means for them, you know, and kind of reevaluate and figure out, you know, are all of these, is everyone rowing in the same direction, as you noted?
And I think that the example you were talking about, that I think I might have mentioned before, now my terrible memory is becoming a joke, was a bank I worked on when I was in Australia, and how it can damage the idea of everyone pulling in the same direction. And certainly we talked earlier about helpful messages from a customer perspective, and working with one of the top 4 big banks in Australia, and the commercial finance team, which is credit cards and personal loans, had a specific target to achieve, specific just to them, and it's a number of loans and how much is on the books at any one time, and all that kind of, obviously revenue then comes from interest and all that kind of stuff. And they wanted to do a campaign which was triggered by a customer paying off their personal loan, completely paying it off. What they wanted to do was then try and sell another loan, personal loan. And if you think about that in their silo, that makes some sense, because they're like, oh God, I've lost a personal loan, I need another one. And I know this person's already had one, so maybe they want another one, so I'm going to do that. But at a macro level, what they should have been thinking is, do you know what? This person's now got a bunch of disposable income. What's the right thing for that? Well, the right thing might be a savings account, or it might be investment, or it might be whatever it is at a macro kind of level. And I think, especially in a recession where mistakes are magnified by the pressure that you're under, making sure that the KPIs are all right and aligned at a business level, and everyone's pulling towards the right things at a business level, not just within their little focus, is super important.
Yeah, and prioritized. And we do a lot of workshops with our clients and our team and stuff. And a lot of those exercises are, you know, it's collaborative. So everybody's in the same room or virtually in you know, COVID-19 days. You know, everybody's doing it online, but the reality is you're having those perspectives represented, and everybody's having those discussions, and there's collaboration happening among there, so that there's consensus building that happens, and that you can all kind of take away and use that to, you know, get everyone rowing in the right direction and align on what those things are. Again, as a digital company, you know, there's a lot of temptation to measure everything, and this is a great opportunity to kind of slim down and, you know, make your New Year's resolution, you know, a more sustainable data strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the examples you gave there really helped to illustrate the point in that, you know, if because as you say, if you're in marketing and you have a target to sell a load of this, you're going to go and sell a load of that. You're not going to be worried about the wider business goals. So having that unified approach is super important. And I think it can also be applied to different channels. You know, if you're an SEO executive versus an offline marketing executive, your jobs and KPIs may be, SEO is about driving traffic to the website, driving sales. And because you've got your blinkers on, you do SEO, you're perhaps missing a trick in working with other marketing executives in the team, working with other channels to combine them so that they work best together. So, you know, a great example of that is, we know if we're going to do a door drop campaign, we get a 20% uplift on that door drop campaign if it follows a mass media campaign, like a TV campaign. So that's a really dead basic example of, if the mass media buying team are talking to the direct marketing team,
they would know.
There's a halo effect there between them.
I think that's one of the things that an agency, you know, not to flog an agency, but an agency can do is help you with that integrated picture. So that example I mentioned about the Australian bank, because we as an agency were seeing everything, all the briefs from all the different silos, we're able to then talk to the head of, you know, whatever it is, who oversees everything, and say, do you realize this doesn't feel right, does it? You know, and to their credit, they were like, no, that doesn't feel right. let's do something else. But I think that we're talking there about the leadership of the marketing team being able to say this is happening, that's not happening, this is happening, that's not happening, and being able to give a really clear view, because it is super. I mean, I'm a specialist in CRM and CX and loyalty and those kind of things, so you do end up a little bit blinkered. So I think there's a role for either an agency or the marketing director, if it is, to be able to say, hang on, we need to think about this much more holistically than we are. And I say, especially in a time of recession where mistakes are amplified.
And I guess there's probably a point in there about so when people who are watching this webinar, either live or the recording, are potentially working with agencies on their marketing in some capacity, is probably a nugget in there about how to get the most out of an agency that you're working with, and it's sharing the full picture with them. Because if you work with an agency and it's siloed, so for example, if somebody's working with you guys, but they only give you access to a bit of it to look at, the value that you can add is surely a lot less.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and we see that all the time, and a lot of times are asking when we're hosting those workshops I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, can we get other stakeholders in the room so that we can have their perspectives represented and get a better understanding of this? And you know, sometimes they're kind of like surprised by that, like, oh, you want another agency that's a competitor of yours to be in a workshop with us? And we're like, yeah, that's absolutely fine with us. We just want to make sure that we're doing the best for the bigger purpose.
Yeah, and that's a super refreshing and grown-up take, because I'm sure, Tim, you've been in situations, or I've been in situations like this, where sometimes the client didn't want to get the agencies together because they all knew they'd be trying to steal each other's stuff, and having little conversations, and would not sabotage somebody, but certainly not help somebody as much as maybe they would, as they should. And I think part of that is on agencies as well, so to act like grown-ups, like I said, you know, and I think that's never a fun situation to find yourself in.
No, I think we've got a bit of a theme here of collaboration over competition as a method of getting through. It's about, like I say, working with other purpose-led business. I mean, Tim, we were introduced as a result of B Corp network, as we're certified B Corp as well. And like you say, collaborating with other agencies, getting a broader picture. I think there's probably a nugget of advice in there for agencies as well, is having the knowledge internally to understand the full marketing picture rather than just your niche. You know, we see a lot of other agencies in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same with you, Tim, and Rob, that they have specialisms, which is excellent for execution, but having the knowledge and awareness of the wider marketing piece is only going to help them grow and help them serve their clients better.
Yeah, and good collaboration is hard. It's not easy. I mean, people think about collaboration as, oh, you just get a bunch of people in a room and you brainstorm, and it's not like that. There are actual methodologies that you go through for problem framing and problem solving and all of this kind of stuff. And so, you know, making sure that the people that are involved in those conversations understand that, because it is not a simple thing. You know, that conversation about brainstorming and just getting people in the room might be a good start. But when it really comes down to like centering the idea of good collaboration within your organization, it has to go a lot deeper than that.
And I think the other thing that promotes that collaboration, to make a really good point there, is around, I think there's a key issue in a recession, especially around transparency of why the business is making the decisions that it's making. So it might be, I mean, if you think about the COVID recession was so different because it shut down certain things. So there was no point in short-term advertising for travel companies, because you couldn't book a holiday anyway. But there was still value in brand building. I think the point being, if you decide as a business and a collaborative business make a decision that actually, you know what, we're going to pragmatically keep focusing, try and retain our brand building stuff. Maybe we'll drop certain channels a little bit lower or whatever it might be, that everyone comes on the ride, so that the people who are in whatever channel it is going to get less money understand exactly why, and that their KPIs and their perspective will change in result. You know, I spent too many years client side where someone says, I'm cutting your budget, but I expect the same results, which is basically just defying gravity. It's some nonsense sentence. But I think that bringing those people along with it, I think, Tim, you made a really good point when we were talking before we started as well about the idea that you don't want your teams spooked. You know, as you go through a recession, you want them to feel part of the decision making, part of the problem solving, rather than, oh God, are our necks always on
Right.
on the line.
Yeah.
Because it just spreads. And then people stop thinking about the problem they're trying to solve, and they start thinking about, crap, am I going to have a job next month?
Right.
So,
And 9 times out of 10, if people are willing to be creative enough and collaborate enough, there's probably efficiencies that you can identify, creative ways to, create efficiencies and to figure out how to continue moving forward without having to just axe huge headcounts. And if you're at that point where you're having to axe huge headcounts, you aren't thinking long term anyway, because something like this you should have a contingency plan for.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think the point that you could extend again, one of the things that Iris talks a lot about is participation. We build participation brands, and we have this thing called the Participation Brand Index, and it's all about, not all about, but a large chunk of it is about bringing customers into the process. So you're talking about collaboration, and we also talked about marketing being the voice of the customer. How do you, for the right brands at the right times, bring that customer participation into what you're doing, and you understand what the customers want, what they're thinking at all times? Because again, it's very easy for the panic stations to set in, and you start just worrying about, you start thinking about customers, and you start thinking about pounds in a way, or dollars.
In my 25 years of doing what I've been doing with Mightybytes, the number one thing that I see customers doing that is challenging is making assumptions about their customers and not incorporating them into various processes, whether that's user experience or whether that's customer research or whatever it is. 9 times out of 10, they're making assumptions, and they think that that's just the way it's always been done, and that's what it is, and that's the rule. And then they spend a huge amount of money building something that nobody uses or that nobody buys or whatever, because they didn't actually incorporate those perspectives into the creation process.
Yeah, and you get that great sentence. I'm going to have flashbacks of earlier bits of my career here, but you actually do this to the customer, and you create a beautiful case and got a bunch of data that says we should do this, and then somebody senior says, well, that's not my experience, and the whole thing goes out the window. Yeah. So that's always an interesting part. Like, I'm just having flashbacks of earlier in my career.
Yeah, it's that whole sample size of one,
Yeah, exactly. My daughter did this and did this.
Yeah, and I guess I would imagine going to a recession, the most common one will be my customers want to spend less, or my customers want the cheapest option, which might in aggregate be true across the whole economy, but not necessarily for your target market, your customer segment.
Maybe not.
So yeah, your point there on ask your customers, which so few companies do.
And if you're building community with them already, they're readily there and available and happy to engage in that conversation.
Absolutely. And the point you made on transparency within an organization about why budgets are changing and being cut is it, like you say, applicable to you with your end customers as well? We've seen prices obviously have gone up massively over the last year or so, and the brands that I think have come out of that best are the ones who've really clearly explained why.
I absolutely agree. I think prices are going to go up, and I think because of inflation's whatever percentage is out, 10%, 9%, whatever it is at the moment. And I think don't be euphemistic either about it. Don't call them reviews or alter it. Just you're right, be absolutely front. I forget who it was, but there was a brand, might have been Pret, maybe, that they put their subscription, their coffee subscription. They put their coffee subscription price up, and wrote an ad and like a letter. It was like a manifesto, like a letter from the CEO, and said exactly, I think it was Brad, I'm really hoping it is. They did that, and they were very specific about, here's why. We get it, it sucks, but like this is why we're doing those things. So I think you're absolutely right, Tom. I think that transparency is super important. Customers are not daft, Yeah,
no, for sure. And they've heard, Southwest Airlines is the biggest story lately, but they've heard stories of corporate greed over and over and over. So they're immediately going to go in with a kind of side eye to any of these things. So if you're being open and transparent and honest all the way through, then you shouldn't have to worry about any of that,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm just conscious of time. We've got about 10 minutes left of having a chat before we open it up to questions. So if anybody does have any questions who's watching live, if you ping them in the Q&A section or the chat section at the bottom, we'll get to those in about 10 minutes time. But I think we've covered quite a lot there from the kind of common errors that we've seen in past recessions, from cutting too deep too fast, which leads to a kind of a lack of brand building and awareness when you're coming out the other side, which has a hugely negative impact because you're losing that share of voice and market share. So potential solution to that is looking to see, can we maintain spend in the knowledge that a lot of our competitors will be cutting to help gain market share over the period. Tim, we talked about the insourcing and outsourcing fluctuation. So losing all of that experience very, very quickly from your business is very, very hard to then get back at the other end. We've talked on pricing, transparency, collaboration, purpose, breaking down silos, having clear KPIs for individuals in the team. Is there anything else that you two think is worth talking about on the topic of optimizing marketing spend, given where we are currently?
Well, I was reading an interesting article this morning on, I want to say it was in Campaign, which, if people don't know, is like an advertising trade press thing. And they were talking to, I'm looking at my other screen, sorry, forgive me, just trying to make sure I get my words right here.
The same thing.
Yeah, and I was talking about this idea of, we mentioned earlier about the idea that more and more marketers are becoming aware that within a recession, you need to maintain spend.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions was, what's going to happen to the cost of media? And there was an interesting debate around, if a brand does retrench into kind of short-term sales activation media, will those holding their nerve with the brand building stuff, TV, out home, that kind of stuff, will they get cheaper prices because the demand for those will drop? Or, which is usually what happens in recession, or given inflation, are brands going to try and protect their margins, which requires a strong brand, which is why, like I mentioned earlier, like Nielsen Active Holidays and House Chocolate are putting their prices up to try and maintain their profit margins. I think that's going to be, I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's an interesting thing to look at, is that if you're going to try and maintain how much about marketing education and what we know about recessions is going to actually be acted upon, if that makes sense. Be an interesting one to look at. But I do think that point about trying to maintain your brand building stuff is important, and it might end up being cheaper, which would be really healthy for those that do that.
Yeah, be interesting to see, because it's one of those where, whilst the theory stacks up, and we all know that's what should be done, when you're seeing the numbers fall and missing targets, then
it's hard to maintain your nerve. Maintaining your nerve is very difficult. Yeah, there was another phrase I read, which was, I don't think recession, think recovery.
I like
so we're going through a tough time now. But it will end at some point. And how do we need to survive through the recession. And I appreciate for some people, the 6 inches in front of their face, that's all that matters. But for a lot of brands, how do I think about exiting this in the best shape possible and with a great trajectory? And some of the things I think we've talked about today will help with that massively. I love that phrase of "don't think recession, think recovery" is a useful mantra.
Right, I think so. I agree completely, and also really relevant in this day and age of constant disruption, constant change. There's a great TEDx talk. I can't remember the woman's name. It's very long. But she talks about, like, at the height of the Industrial Revolution, the average company, it took them about 75 years before they, lost a huge amount of market share and had to go back and redefine their products and services, or redefine or redesign the business and stuff. And now with all this ongoing disruption that's happening, and climate change, and all this kind of stuff that's happening in business, that life cycle has gone down to 7 years, which means that about every 3.5 years, companies need to start thinking about how to reinvent themselves. So if you think about that, if you need to reinvent yourself every 3.5 years, you should just start getting into the mindset of the fact that this is going to be ongoing, whatever it may be, because it's going to put you in a place where you're going to be so much better prepared when it actually does. And I hate to that sounds like really negative and really, really, downer. But the reality is, thinking long-term helps you think about this kind of stuff, and helps you think about, like, how do we shore up for, potential things that could happen. And if they don't happen, you're in the catbird seat because you're already prepared for something bad. And if they do happen, you're better prepared than most of your competitors or others, that are there. And so you can use the resources you have to build up those communities and help your customers and help your stakeholders. in more meaningful ways. I think that's just really wise advice overall.
Yeah, it comes back to that point of helpfulness. If you're planning ahead and thinking in the future, as you mentioned there, then you're in a much better position when times get tough to be helpful.
Yep.
I mean, we were in a really fortunate position at the start of the pandemic to be able to pay our suppliers on 7-day terms.
Right.
And as a result of being able to do that, then we have even better relationships with our suppliers now on the other side of it, through doing exactly what you just described there. It's a really interesting point. We've had a question come in. So I'm paraphrasing slightly, but we're looking at would or should marketing managers drill down further when we look at cutting or maintaining spend? Can you drill down a little bit further into kind of which areas of marketing you think should be reviewed in terms of looking at acquisition, retention, loyalty? Should businesses be looking at focusing on one particular area? I know we've talked about brand building quite a lot.
I'm going to play the ultimate get out of jail free card, which is it depends on your business.
There we go.
Which is always the great one. And as a CRM person, you know what great get out of jail free card for any CRM people listening is, we'll have to test that. I'm not sure. That's also a good one. I think the simple, or the way that I would look at it is I think the long and short of it approach of brand building versus short-term activation stuff, and that kind of does split certain channels in certain ways. I think is really important, and it'll depend on where you are as a brand, and maybe there's a case for cutting some of the short-term stuff if it's not generating as good an ROI, or you feel like the recession is going to completely strip immediate demand back. Why would I, like holidays, maybe expensive holidays or something like that? Maybe I have to strip that out of short-term activation stuff for certain industries and certain categories and certain products. I mean, I speak as a loyalty as a CRM guy, so I'm always going to say try and maintain that, because I think they keep you going during tough times. But I think it's, again, I hate to say that, but it really does depend on who you are and what your industry is.
Right.
But the macro level stuff tells us brand building is important to keep doing.
Yeah, for sure. No, I was just going to say, good business leaders know what works best for their company. Like they know, like right now, if you ask them, they're like, oh, these are the things that are working best, or they could get that information relatively quick. They know what's working best, and so there's an opportunity to figure out, like, well, what is, if you know a recession is looming, what puts that stuff at risk? And it's, that risk analysis is not that difficult to do if you know your business well. And so, do you double down on what's working well? Or is it, because, as Rob was saying, if this is going to completely, the bottom's going to drop out of our revenue stream, what are the alternates? What are the things that we can do to be creative in problem solving and figuring out how to shore up the revenue streams in such a way. So I think that it is going to be different for every business. However, you have the tools at your disposal right now and should be able to figure that out without a lot of pain, I would imagine. And
I will justify my "it depends" comment further by saying that you might be a brand that thrives in a recession. Maybe you're a quick serve restaurant brand, fast food chain. Maybe you're a cheaper alternative. Maybe you're, Aldi. Maybe you're those kind of things. And actually, the best thing you can do right now is to increase your short-term sales activation activity, because this is your time. This is the time at which. So you can see how completely different that is to somebody who is, going to struggle because of recession versus those, because recession, there's always people that thrive.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and I think it's, as Tim made a really good point, it's about knowing how susceptible, what happens to your industry and your category and your brand during hard times and good, because that will just completely change the long and short focus of what you do over the next year or two.
Yeah. As I said at the top of this conversation, it is a good time to reevaluate, your relationship with data, your marketing. It is a good time to reevaluate all of these things. Just don't do it at the expense of your business. You know what I mean? Like it's that stuff takes time. It takes resources. If all of a sudden you decide you wake up tomorrow and you're going to be a purpose-driven organization, it's not quite that easy. So, be smart about the resources you have at your disposal. But doing that, you should be able to take some time to reevaluate and figure out what's working and what's not.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you for the question. If anybody else has got any others before we wrap up, pop them in there now. I think for me, the toughest thing is not knowing how long the macroeconomic climate is going to remain as it is, which is a pretty useless point to make because there's nothing any of us can do about it. But I imagine if we knew the pandemic, for example, was going to last as long as it did, I think people would have acted in very different ways. And likewise with the recession, we know it was going to last 6 months, then you can make quite clear decisions. Yes, we've got to keep our brand building activity going on. If it's 2 years, that's a long time to just be doing brand building activity and switching off the other stuff. So it's never a perfect science, and I think retaining some level of agility in there is going to be really important. So it's difficult to do long-term planning, but taking it,
the key word I think that came out in everything I've been looking at is pragmatism. Yes, using empirical evidence, but being pragmatic. Most brands will have to cut costs in some ways. It's just how you do it and which bits you choose to cut. So don't cut things that are going to give you growth in the long term for a short term quick buck. Try and avoid, if you can, cutting your staff. Focus on operational efficiency. Those kind of things. That level of pragmatism and agility, I think, is what you use is really important. And I say I'm not going to sit here and guess when the recession will end because this is being recorded.
Right.
That was going to be my next question, Tim. And
I'm not an idiot, so who knows? But I think that point about pragmatism is really important. If you look at the people who came out of it well in the last Great Recession, which was 2008, 2007, 2008, the GFC and all that kind of stuff, it was those people that continued to invest in long-term revenue building, whatever that might be. I'm talking at a business level now, versus just retreated back into their shells. And the good ones focused on operational efficiency, but they also focused on what was going to drive them future growth. And I think that's the key, is not to just kind of retreat completely behind the castle walls and retrench completely in that way.
I think just conscious of time, so just to kind of sum up, I think we've covered a fair bit of ground there in the last 53 minutes. So thank you both for your time. I think that the key takeaways from my perspective is, first of all, not making the mistakes of recessions past. So not cutting too deep too quick, not being so quick to outsource and then insource and keep that fluctuation going, which we see so often. We had some real good themes throughout around collaboration and transparency. So both internally within your business about why marketing budgets are changing, priorities might be changing, budgets might be going to different places, but then also with your customers, talking through pricing and collaborating with them to ensure that you can stay afloat, change your offer to suit them depending on what the period is, and then collaborating with other businesses. So we gave the example of B Corp and B Lab, collaborating together with other agencies, and then finally kind of having that holistic view and accurate KPIs. So not just sitting there with the blinkers on, but both looking at, if your target is to sell a certain thing, consider the wider business offering. If you're marketing and you're an SEO specialist, consider the wider marketing mix. And by doing that, overall, your company will be better off, and you'll have a hopefully more optimized marketing spend as we go through this recession. Is there anything else, Tim and Rob, you would like to say before we sign off?
Thanks for watching.
Yeah, likewise. We covered a lot of ground here, which is great. And thanks for the conversation, and thanks for having me. It was really useful and helpful to learn from you all.
It's a fun chat. Thank you.
Lovely stuff. Well, thank you again, Tim and Rob, for being part of this. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back with another webinar next month. Thanks all.